So thank you very much. I would like to present here today the part of my PhD, which is a kind of monograph on Hungarian avant-garde in 70s. It was a highly political art, and so I would like to present some analysis which were in the PhD, and some other analysis from other countries of Central Eastern Europe. Sorry. Okay, the orphaned language of Marxism. In Central Eastern Europe, the notional status of Marxism, especially during 60s and 70s, was highly problematic. While the Western world of intellectuals was crucially defined by the vivid presence of the discourse and works such as famous Althusserian Reading Capital from 1965, defined the status of the 1968. In Central Eastern Europe, Marxism was neither the language of the intellectuals nor the discourse of proletariat. Despite its seemingly strong status, there was no real porte-parole of Marxism within the social space. Marxism was lectured, sometimes discussed, but never spoken. It structured, however, various discourses by influencing the official propaganda language, meaningless cliches included in everyday speech, and the perverse logic of the common adaptation of the dialectical thinking. Significantly, most artists in the communist countries identified themselves with the concept of an intellectual rather than proletarian. Contrary to its homogeneous appearance and comparable economical status, the Central Eastern European society seemed to define itself as a class one. According to Marx, the intellectuals manifesting their class separation were driven by the state of the, I quote, false consciousness, end quote, ideology. So false consciousness was equal with ideology for Marx, which determined the fact that they failed to understand their role in historical processes. While in the West, paradoxically, the presence of capitalism and the influence of the free market over the art market freed the proletarian class consciousness among artists, who realized they possess exclusively their labor forces, which according to Marx is the essential feature of proletariat. In Central Eastern Europe, artists were trapped between the absence of the oppressive capitalism structure and the uncompleted project of the communist revolution. Their derivation from the social reality and attachment to the symbolical register, condemned as bourgeois by the official propaganda, was in Marxist terms the praising for the superstructure, disregarding the base. Most artists, therefore, turned their back to the social and political reality and practiced art simply rooted in modernist paradigms or following Western movements. The unique artistic environment appeared in communist Hungary in the second half of the 60s and during the 70s. Hungarian neo-avant-garde art functions as the, I quote, Aegean manner of production, the notion described by Leszek Kołakowski as sufficient to invalidate foundation of historical materialism, describing the system which does not allow the rise of the native bourgeois, end of quote. Similarly, analysis of the visual level of Hungarian neo-avant-garde art seems sufficient to invalidate Hungarian discourse concentrated on the notional coupling, the chase and the escape. Hungarian art historians tend to see the art as both escaping Marxist cliché and chasing the current of the seemingly natural and organic Western art history. Thus, such qualifications as trying to convert Dürer time as if the history had been stopped on this side of the Iron Curtain by the interference of the inconvenient political context. The analysis, however, allows to state the contrary. Both Marxism and socialist realism had shaped the significant background of artist language and visual memory. The very background was neither disregarded nor despised. To perform an artistic revaluation of this background, they spoke the language of ideology, which treated not dogmatically, but rather instrumentally, revealed itself as a language being, not as universal and omnipotent model of reality, thus becoming the tool of its own deconstruction. Furthermore, the Marxist background had equipped the artist with relativism and fundamental suspiciousness towards universal languages, causing their unorthodox stance toward Western isms, contrary to what Hungarian art historians want to believe. Hungarian art history, however, perceives the art as political exclusively out of necessity, longing for universal organic discourse. Therefore, the essential crack, the discourse of Hungarian art history, had been implying Western notions, adequacy for the art, where the artists, uniquely in Europe, were rather interested in exploiting languages, claiming their universality, both communism and Western discourse, against themselves. They were among few intellectuals in Central Eastern Europe able to evaluate the ideology on the semantic level, which finds a significant equivalent in the writings of Milan Kundera, philosophy of Leszek Kołakowski, and the political event on the Round Table in Poland. These artists were deliberately stepping into the ideological semantic minefield, which is the notion of Ryszard Kapuściński, I will talk about it later, thus blowing up the crucial categories of the language of ideology. Exhibited during the famous Iparterv exhibition in 1969, this was the second Iparterv exhibition, the artwork of Giulio Concoy, entitled The Monument, formulates this kind of a critical discourse towards the language of the power. On the pediment, the artist has placed the lump of ice wrapped up in a gauze. When the melting ice, due to chemical reaction with potassium permanent, was leaving the puddle of a blood on the floor. The analysis by Katalin Keserű introduces the significant point of reference for the work of art, stating that most monuments are never bleeding. The work of Concoy, however, appears as the realization of the unrealized and at the time unrealizable monument of 1956, thus calling into questions the official closure of the bloody period of history, which should have been commemorated. The horizontal monument creates the crucial tension in comparison with socialist realist monumental vertical sculpture of already realized monuments commemorating already recognized moments in history. It evokes a human body, and the process of melting seems equivalent to the decomposition of an unburied corpse. Not commemorated, not gone down into history, the corpse resides in the present. Thus, the process of bleeding seems permanent, indicating the status of the lump in between the living body and the corpse. The work was exhibited 2 more times in Poznań and in Szombathely in 1994 and 1998, developing or restricting the meaning by placing or not the container under the sculpture, as we can see here. Without which the blood was transmitted on the souls of visitors. The symbolic overtone of the work is perfectly readable. Meaning of the toe ransomed with blood. Simultaneously, the moment of the final melt of the sculpture is identical with the process of bleeding out, and thus polemical towards Marxist concept of history, indicates the inevitability of historicizing the communism itself. The censorship, recognizing the work as subversive, this work was set in motion as a foreword for the exhibition. So the censorship immediately recognized the work as subversive and decided to destroy it after the second day of the exhibition. Ironically, they decided to melt it in the boiler, thus accelerating the process initiated by the artist. The peculiar status of the litmus in art has the body, which in art of the Hungarian avant-garde was never characterized by the longing for the universality or cohesion. Hungarian artists never tried to tear it away from ideology. In the contrary, it was their exposure to ideology which revealed its mechanism by turning them against themselves. The significant example of the regularity was the artist who for many years was the only one listed under Tiltott category, Tibor Hoyos. Peculiarity of body art performed by Hoyos was defined by Piotr Piotrowski as directed towards the three different levels. He physically injured his own body, then he destroyed the film negative and the picture surface, so it was on the three surfaces. Picture present naked artists during masturbation, tied, bandaged, burnt with needles, plaster and electric wires. The artist's body, however, does not serve as the medium of his emotional states. Their provocativeness does not lie in the thematic content, but in the special icon-like status of the surface, which status is so strong that the artistic communicate is disturbed. The autoerotism, self-destruction, as well as autoimmune, appear as variants of auto-communication caused by the artistic autism of Hoyos. During his first action, Hoyos was sitting at the opening, there are no existent photos of the event, in Hotfon Museum in 1976, in the chalk circle, blinded with a scarf, taking pictures of viewers with the camera. Both chalk circle and the scarf used by the artist constitute variants of the autistic surface. The first motif, readable in the meaningful dialogue with Bertolt Brecht's famous The Caucasian Chalk Circle, defines the artist's body as the object of legitation, alluding through the agency of the play to the Salmon judgment. The camera kept by Hoyos reduces the three-dimensional reality to the two-dimensional picture, repeating a function of an eye, which similarly reduces the reality to the picture on the eye's retina. Thus, the picture on the surface, I will show you the thus, the picture of the surface of an eye assumes the border status, being the part of human eye. Simultaneously, it belongs to the external reality. Therefore, the eye betrays beholder, and the reality loses externality. An extreme example of visualization and tensing of the border surface was the action in Warsaw. Also, there are no existent photos of the action, during which Hoyos was hanging from the ceiling on the rope tied to his wrists. In his hands, the artist was keeping camera as he was taking picture of the audience. What appears as a gesture of imagining the autistic surface. As he fainted, because nobody among the audience untied him, it was the purpose of the action to prove that nobody will do it. The surface photographed by Hoyos appeared as the surface of failed interaction, disturbed communication. Therefore, the autism appears adequate for the Central Eastern Europe, and the surface takes shape of the Iron Curtain. This constitutes the artistic discussion with the Marxism alienation, interpreted as separation not from the production of labor, but from his own communicate, changing thus communication into the self-communication, the autistic message. Moreover, the autism of Hoyos, the figure of Central Eastern European artist, appears significant when analyzed within the Marxist notion of alienation further. Contrary to the popular belief, that notion is not primarily a simple feeling of isolation or loneliness within the society, but the essential separation from the process of production. The more effective engaged is the proletarian in his work, the richer is the capitalist, the cheaper is the worker's labor force, and more intense his objectification. According to Marx, the worker becomes a commodity and as such serves the victim of the commodity fetishism. In Marxism, the commodity fetishism is denoted as a replacement of the personal relationships with the subject relationship towards the capital. So the relationships are not horizontal, but there is one single relationship with the capital. The absence of the reality register is therefore clearly visible as a lack of horizontal interpersonal bonds suppressed by the alliance with capital. As Alain Badiou stated in the Communist Hypothesis, written after the eruption of the economical crisis in 2008, in order to break the alienation, we have to, I quote, we have to get back to the immediate and reflexive life of all those who live in this world. We get back to that. If we can get back to that, we can unflinchingly observe capitalism and even the disaster movie it has been making us watch. It is not the film that is real, it is the cinema, states Badiou, end of quote. The performance by Hoyos may be interpreted with the similar notion of alienation, which led the society to the state of a peculiar immobility, disillusion of the interpersonal connections, and the disruption of the social responsibility. One can not fail to notice, however, that the passivity of the public was caused equally by the special mythical role of the artist, performer, which was hardly even weakened by the intellectual artists in the Central Eastern Europe, despite their social status. The consequence of the Hoyos gesture is therefore the definition of the artist polemical towards modernist paradigms. Hoyos threw himself on the mercy of the society to enlarge the level of its self-consciousness. Contrary to Hoyos, the Czechoslovakian artist Pet Stembera created a state of danger for the audience. During his action, entitled The Archer, Stembera directed the arrow from the blow dipping in the container with the information poison to the target, but threw in the opposite direction towards the audience. Besides the obvious layer of meaning, the performance seems to be highly critical towards the Marxist notion of history, focused on the proletarian revolution as a target, but disregarding the proletarians. The similar procedure was performed by Tomasz Szentjube, the Hungarian artist, in 1972 in Balaton Boglar Chapel during the performance Penalty Prevention Autotherapy, the artist wearing the bucket on his head, resembling the mode of Chinese tortures. Szentjube incited the audience to ask him questions such as, do you feel particularly exposed for the reason you cannot see? Who are you talking to? Creating thus the situation of a communication bearing semblance to a political interrogation. The action was at great risk as the chapel was under a constant observation and possibility of spies among the audience was a real one. Sentube, by the simple act of sitting down with the bucket on his head, interpreted the space of the chapel as the space of a conflict. This closing is semantic neutralization. His position, however, was a simple reflection of an everyday practice. Its aim was to reveal that isolation, interrogation, risk, lack of knowledge, who our interlocutor is, were part of everyday interaction, as if the bucket was a part of our heads. In a sense, the position of Sentube was safer than others, and it was simple visualization of their stance, a state of awareness of the danger. Sentube revealed thus the presence of the oppressive interrogation-like language in everyday communication, redefining conversation or a dialogue as a form of mutual interrogation. Tibor Hoyos and Tomasz Sentube were two most radical artists in Hungarian avant-garde. The cultural policy in the country was based on infamous three T's. Tomogatot, supported, Turt, tolerated, Tiltot, forbidden. For many years, unofficially, of course, we now know it, all avant-garde artists, with the exception of Tibor Hoyos, were listed under tolerated because it was just the tool of manipulation. But in practice, everyone but Hoyos was listed under tolerated. Hoyos was forbidden. The artist was the only one forbidden. Sentube, on the other hand, was constantly observed by the secret services and was the artist with the most special file. By the way, he told me that he was not handed in the file until today, and nobody can tell him why. Thus, the interpretation of alienation denoted as the separation from their work. The more and the better they produced, the more censored and absent they were on the scene. Established a peculiar deconstruction of the Marxist discourse, using the philosophy as a tool against the communist regime. Similarly, the notion of alienation was of the interest of the former Yugoslavian artist Mladen Stilinovic. In 1978, the artist performed in the private apartment the work entitled Artist at Work, a series of photographs showing Stilinovic sleeping on the bed. Some pictures present the artist lying on the bed with his eyes open, resting. The visual level and verbal one, spoken by the title, seem contradictory. The artist is not performing any activity which could be defined either artistic or labor. He restrained himself from working to demonstrate the alienation which afflicts artists in the communist regime. Separated from their work as they are prevented from doing anything significant, they may as well do nothing. Moreover, his work does not count as such as long as he is not defined as a member of proletariat, and the work does not serve the communist revolution. The kind of artistic strike Stilinovic applied to criticism of capitalism, Stilinovic applied here to criticism of communism, was repeated by the artist this year in Ludwig Museum of Budapest in the original Marxist context of the criticism of capitalism. So now he used the same tool, Marxism, to criticize capitalism. Similar overtone had an action by the Hungarian artist Endre Todt performed in Amsterdam in 1980. Todt was wandering over the city, handing provocative banners, stating in English, "I am doing nothing, I'm looking for nobody," etc. The action, however, did not have a status of a simple joke, but rather a political statement. Action appears as performed out of borders of the censorship. Therefore, the otherwise suspicious activity of wandering over the area with no apparent goal appear as neutral from the ideological perspective of the West. "I'm doing nothing wrong," seems to state Todt, enumerating various nothing you could censor. In many different venues in the West, Todt performed his actions, I'm glad, enumerating enumerating various activities which made him glad due to his low expectations under communist regime. In the poster designed, and this is, I'm glad if I can advertise on posters, for instance. I'm glad if I can take one step. And in the poster, designed as a punchline of the series, he juxtaposed his smiling face with a severe face of Vladimir Lenin, pointing at Lenin as the cause of his joy and indirectly as the creator of his works of art. Todt takes over the language of the visual propaganda, and the picture of Lenin, moreover, becomes its porte-parole in order to prove that the language is owned by everyone, which does not mean the collection of subjects, but the common subject. It reflects the logic of the dialectic, which invalidates the binary opposition between the present and the future, and allows to define the truth as the truth of the proletarian revolution, not the simple gathering of facts. Fichte, everyone thinks it's Hegelian, but I believe that Kołakowski is right that it's Fichte. Maxim, then so much the worse for the facts, allows to define the status of the artistic gesture as appropriation, the form of usurpation, and demonstrate the impossibility of identification with proletariat. 3 years earlier, in 1972, Yugoslavian artist Balint Somboty performed in Budapest an action undertaken to explore the status of the image of Lenin. Entitled Lenin in Budapest, the work is constituted with a series of photographs depicting the artist holding the banner with the portrait of Lenin. According to Miszko Suwakowicz, the work of art was conceived to disclose the fetish-like function of an image that would be, however, inexact. This is my interpretation, would be, however, inexact, both regarding the notion of fetish in Marxism and Freudism. In 2009, Balint Somboty, this is the picture, repeated the action of ego by the shared image of a leader, which operates as superego when the society falls in love with the leader. The theory was presented by Freud in 1928 in Civilization and its Discontents regarding mechanism of totalitarian regimes. He meant fascism, of course, but within the Marxism apparatus, the action investigated the notion of the Marxist deed, appreciated by Lenin, who carried the Marxist revolution into the effect. There is a crucial difference in presentation of Lenin, Marx and Engels and Lenin. Marx appears as the head of the revolution and communists deprived of its body. If there is a body, it is like stone-like body or very simplified, oversimplified. Lenin, in the contrary, he is the body of the revolution, the essence of the Marxist deed. Even his head is simply the part of the dynamic body due to the head cover and the dynamic triangles of the whole composition. Balint Somboty deprived Lenin of its body and replaced this body with his own. Thus, his own body appears as a tool of the deed, but the meaning of the act is changed. Somboty appears as proletariat entitled to take a matter into his own hands, contrary to Lenin, who took a position of a leader. By squattering the deed of Lenin, the artist reinstates its legitimate performer, performing the Marxist deed contrary to its original assumption. Polish artistic environment was particularly resistant towards the political commentary. The openly political gesture was isolated in Poland from the predominating context of art, which was not directly engaged in political disputes. Polish couple Zofia Kulik and Przemysław Kiefiek developed the art of commentary and so-called parasite art. The couple was truly engaged in the totalitarian ideology, applying for the membership of Polish United Workers' Party and accepting official commissions. During their work on the state order, however, they were appropriating the time of creation, expanding it into the process which can be interpreted with Marxist terms. Thus, the famous man prick, here, 1974-75, and the plaster bird for the bronze were created. This one. The matter of the state commissioned artwork was turned against itself by Kwie Kulik, consequently producing a sort of a self-betrayal. The phallic form of a prick man completed an official work of art, but only as a stage, but only a stage of the official work mediates between the raw material and the final, but already pre-existent in the matter, shape. It ridicules the tool of propaganda, as it presents the official propaganda art as a form of the synthesis of the two former states. It is interesting how the body is excluded here within the artwork, despite its obvious erotic connotations. The effect of the work is all about the social matter, social subject, and thus social body, the effect, the final effect, not this stage. The figure visible in the picture, documenting the procedure, lacks hands, which in the form of palms and fists were popular visualization of the Marxist deed. And here I present the ready-made, so-called ready-made Soviet poster. And this one is Tomasz Kosarz, another Hungarian artist, later the Fist Museum, which is rooted in 1848 revolution. So it lacks hands, it lacks deeds. Here the tool of the deed appears as sexual male organ, both penetrating deeply the language of ideology and simplifying the experience. It ridicules the content of the visual part, which could be summarized as the imaginary sentence, fuck off or fuck you, absent within the work of art. That absence gives the responsibility of the punchline to the viewer, who is forced to express that content by himself, like I did just before. The erotic appears here as an official factor which serves as the invisible, mute, by essential background of the official discourse. Artists demonstrated that notions excluded from the official language constituted the origins, literally depicting the phallic objects, which conceived the official work of art. The translation of the title of the following word of the couple, the plaster bird for bronze, fails to reflect the meaning present in the Polish language. The word bird is an equivalent of a prick or simply cock, so erotic allusion is present in the very title. Kwie Kulik alludes to the emblem of Poland, the eagle. The plaster cast photographs, while prepared for the bronze objects, suggest the core of the root, or the root of the seemingly solid structure is essentially infirm. Artists semantically appropriated the process of production, emphasizing the fact that although they do not possess the means of production, they own the labor forces. This was exact definition of proletariat by Marx. With the very gesture, the couple was defining itself as proletariat. The second factor crucial for Marx, defining proletariat, the class consciousness of proletariat, was also a part of artistic identity of Kwie Kulik, who believed in communist revolution and therefore applied to be included as artists within the communist social structure. Zofia Kulik, she told me that they truly believed in the revolution and they were applying because they believed that they should create a kind of new proletarian art. The process of the creation applied by the couple can be seen as a pure form of the Derridian deconstruction, undertaken with the notional structure and the logics of the deconstructed system. Therefore, the work appears as highly critical towards the communist regime, despite or even because of their engagement in the communist discourse. The couple subjected the audience to the same mechanism. During their action Pro Agit 2, they invited the audience, including the authorities involved in art, to the performance resembling the party meeting. The space was arranged in a way typical for official meetings, and variety of objects known from everyday political reality were used by the couple. Throughout the event, the role of the audience was redefined few times, as it was not clear if the meeting had the official or subversive character. Audience was not sure about it. The audience was handed in forms where some questions of the personal nature appeared. The performance included the work of the couple, Kwiekulik, entitled Alternation of Red, The Path of Edvard Gierek, the private reflection upon the role of red color, both in everyday context and in the language of propaganda. The gesture appeared as appropriation of the red color by the couple and thus revealed the state appropriation of the system of notions, among others the red color. During the performance, the couple set the alarm clock, which set in motion defined the audience as sleeping and the art of the couple as a factor bringing it back to the state of consciousness. Interestingly enough, a couple intended to be included in the official discourse and official art scene. They attempted to wake authorities up with the language of Marxism and official propaganda. By the gesture, however, they contributed to the criticism of the regime. The action was extremely complex and included numerous factors implying the political context, so I just refer a few ones. The most significant part of the performance was the closing section, during which the red velvet cloth covering the meeting table was torn apart into pieces, which were handed over to the public. Thus, the couple clearly engaged in the process of redefining the proletariat and its capacity, but the variety of the gesture, when condemned to be interpreted as offensive appropriation of the official language, disclosing the only apparent equality construction. One of the most interesting art pieces created in the Central Eastern Europe, employing the language of the official propaganda, is undoubtedly the work of the Romanian artist Ion Grigorescu. If I have time, I will show it this one as well. Ion Grigorescu, A Dialogue with Ceausescu, from 1978. Here the artist is speaking with the language of propaganda, playing both the role of the interviewer and the leader. The closing part of the interview seems to be the most significant one. A quote, "You are exponent of minority," the artist accuses the leader, "the suburb one, and will remain as such because the services will always constitute the stipulated system of majority beside the working class. You overlook the people yearning, disinterested in economic efforts. They are rich people in spite of your vision, a richness you don't know, and what is worse, you are destroying it unconsciously. There was material richness, and today the food is a kind of rubbish. There was a social richness. Today people's unity is only a slogan. Social classes are deeply disunited. Working is repulsive. In service, there is corruption, so their general atmosphere is antisocial." I don't quote to the end, I make it shorter. So Ion Grigorescu not only lectures then the leader on the Marxism, moreover, he redefines the status of the intellectual artist as a part of proletariat. The dialogue functions thus not exclusively as the conversation between the ruling and the ruled one, but as well as the conversation between two different variations of artistic identity. Quotation, "But the poets are singing only miracles made overnight," states Grigorescu in the script. "Our dialogue, the dialogue is necessary because nevertheless there is a truth and a science with which one analyzes the social reality," end of quote. And the closing section, "Repeating instead of remembering." Many works of art created by the artists in Central Eastern Europe were repeated by them within the context of the fall of communism after 1989. To understand the powerful logics of such repetition, one needs to recall the maxim by Sigmund Freud, coined in his dreams work, as, I quote, "repeating instead of remembering," end of quote. According to Freud, the brain of a neurotic patient or a sleeping man, because he never ever realized the dreams of the neurotic patients, because it could be either neurotic or sleeping man, because like that it would be squared. Because for Freud, sleeping man and neurotic was pretty much the same. So that brain produces images of repetition from the past life, as it is not able to consciously include it into the memory. Thus, the event occurred in the past should be defined not only as repressed, but moreover, in the strict sense of the Freudian trauma. The notion, which can be denoted as such, not by the simple fact of the manifestation of unpleasant event, but by the fact that it has been unexpected, both in terms of one's notional system, a psychophysical unpreparedness. I analyzed as a trauma the fall of communism, for instance, because everyone expected it, but no one was really prepared in terms of the notional system. The content of the event is not of the crucial essence, therefore, because it doesn't need to be unpleasant event. In order to get rid of such a traumatic experience, the person is inclined to, even for the process of exposing himself at the mortal danger, to repeat the content and release it by the simple fact of being prepared for it to happen this time. Marina Abramović, the artist from the former Yugoslavia, this is repeated dialogue with Ceausescu from 2012. And Marina Abramović, the artist from former Yugoslavia, is the author of the most significant work exploring the phenomenon of the repetition in the political context of the communist regime. In her work entitled Rhythm 10 from 1973, she was equipped with the set of knives, playing the well-known knife game. The game, typical for the poor societies with no toys, is popular among small children, despite its cruel and aggressive character and dangerous one. Abramović established certain rules for her performance, changing the knife every time she cut herself and recording the action within the sound recording device. The second half of the performance was focused on the artist's attempt to repeat the order of the first part, listening to the recording and including all mistakes. That means hurts and wounds. The performance could be interpreted as the release of the childhood trauma, and the knife game itself should be considered as the first stage of reacting unexpected wounds. Abramović repeats instead of remembering, thus giving the receiver the opportunity to analyze the performance, verbalize it, and include it in the common historical memory. In Marxist terms, Abramović follows the dialectical invalidation of the past and present, presenting the history as the history of repeated mistakes. By the way, it's also an achievement of Georgi Lukács, a great achievement of analyzing the dialectic by the notion of so-called totalitet. It's a very significant one, but I don't want to go into this aspect. Significantly, after the 1989, the self-consciousness of Central Eastern European artists slightly began to change. After the world economic crisis in 2008, most of those artists who had been previously engaged in the deconstruction of the communist regime within the tools of Marxism and official propaganda language used their equipment in order to criticize capitalism. Their engagement in the criticism of capitalism enables to track back the interest in Marxism and adaptation of its notional structure. The very nature of the totalitarian regime was the fact that the most of the theoretical concepts, ideas, and words were appropriated by the official language, and artists needed to fight them back. After Ryszard Kapuściński, it is possible to name the mechanism the semantic minefield, where, I quote, you could get blown into bits with one slip of the tongue, end quote. The situation of the adaptation of Marxism and the language of official propaganda varied in different countries of the former communist Europe. Polish and Hungarian situation may function as two extreme examples of such adaptation, with the Hungarian urge to step into the semantic minefield and the Polish resistance toward an artistic political engagement. Czechoslovakian tradition of happening contributed to the presence of the political art in Czechoslovakia, while the situation in former Yugoslavia was differentiated. For instance, a strong feminist society was contributed to the political criticism. Nevertheless, Marxism, with its dialectical tradition situation in former Yugoslavia, was differentiated. rooted in German systemic philosophy, silently structure the Central Eastern European way of thinking. Therefore, it's essential to examine its status as a language influencing the language of communist unofficial art. Paradoxically, artists from the Central Eastern Europe engaged in the political unofficial art restored the dialectical dimension of the shallow propaganda language. As Marx states, I quote, "Dialectical materialism consists in affirmative recognition of the existing states of things, at the same time also the recognition of the negation of that state, of its inevitable breaking up, because it regards every historically developed social form as in fluid movement and therefore takes into account its transient nature not less than its momentary existence, because it lets nothing impose upon it, and it is, in its essence, both critical and revolutionary." End of quote. Thank you very much.
Thank you for a detailed excursus in East European contemporary art, and I had one question during your whole presentation, but you partly answered in your conclusion. You've said that some artists have repeated their performances after the collapse of the USSR. And I wanted to know whether there were such artists who decided not to do with art after the collapse, who thought that their mission was complete, or were there such artists who completely changed their approach to modern art?
Neither. I think they were still working after 1989, but I don't think they changed their approach. I just simply think, and I want to prove, that the Marxism was a kind of powerful tool which caused their suspiciousness towards all universal languages. So language of propaganda, Westernism, and then after the totalitarian state of capitalism, because I believe this is just another totalitarian discourse, and they deconstructed this discourse equally as they deconstructed the communist regime within the tool of Marxism. Something like that.